Hello, and welcome to the Spoonie Authors Podcast, a podcast where we explore a different disabled author's stories each week. I am your host, Diana Gunn, and joining us today is Forrest Wells. Forrest Wells is an author with a deep passion for all things wild canine, as well as pro football, hockey, and esports. Forrest has authored a short story and several poems in the 2015 to 2017 editions of the Wolf Warriors anthologies, in addition to another short story in the March-April 2019 issue of Canines Publishing's collection of dragon stories. Forrest continues to work on his future stories, including a military sci-fi and a fantasy. He currently lives in his hometown of Thermal, California. Hello, Forrest.
Howdy, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. I'm super excited to talk to you. And I'm really excited for you to talk about your book. So tell us a little bit about Luna, the lone wolf.
Well, it's a young adult story about a wolf who he was going to be an alpha when he became an adult, but before he got the chance, his own brother got him banished basically over a lie. He went from future alpha to lone wolf, never to know the company of another wolf. But even as he gets to accept his new life, other wolves, strange two-legged creatures, and one mockingbird insert themselves into his life and drive him through a gauntlet of trials where he may return to the alpha he was born to be, or he may turn away from it forever, assuming he even survives. The real highlight of the story, though, is I tell it entirely through Luna's perspective. I stay in the wolf mindset from beginning to end, so it's a young adult animal fiction that kind of reads like a fantasy because we see the world like a wolf would.
Yeah, I am obsessed with wolves. I actually, in a bygone era of the internet, used to do forum role plays as wolf characters, and I had a lot of fun doing that. And I've really only ever found a handful of books from the perspectives of any animals at all, really. And they do tend to be wolf books, though.
Well, there's also Warriors and Guardians of Ghoul that kind of do it, although Ghoul is a little more fantasy rather than animals.
I haven't read that one. I will have to check that out. Fantasy is my jam, and animal perspectives are... I understand why a lot of authors don't do it. It's a real challenge to tackle a perspective so different from your own.
Yeah, well, I mean, when a wolf sees a pickup truck, what does he see? And I had to tackle things like that. But although with Guardians of the Ghoul, do the books first, not the movie. The movie tried to condense too many books into one movie. It didn't really highlight it. Start with the books.
Okay. Wait, is that one about the owls?
Yes, that's
I did watch that movie. That was a great, Saturday morning movie, actually.
It wasn't a bad movie. It's just they tried to condense too many of the books because it's, like Animorphs is a whole bunch of short books. And they tried to condense, 7 books into a 1-2-hour movie. Didn't quite work. But it wasn't a terrible movie, and the books are much better.
I hate when there's stuff like that and it's not really clear that it's actually based on a series of books, because if I had known that, I would have bought that series of books last year. So thank you for filling me in. And tell me, why did you end up taking this big challenge? Why did you end up being drawn to writing a whole book in the perspective of a wolf?
Well, as you said, wild canines are always my passion. Wolves, foxes, coyotes. I really just they're really drawn to the wild canines. So when it came time to tell the tale, wolves made it easier for me to take the places Luna needed to go, and also made it easier for me to really get behind it because it was, something that I was passionate about, and I could really enjoy doing the research on, okay, what are wolves really like, and then use that research to balance the needs of the story with real wolf behavior. So it's just the wolf perspective was easy and fun for me to get behind because it's just my passion. I love wolves, and hey, why not?
Fair enough. What is the most interesting fact you learned about wolves when researching for this book?
The concept of the alpha male is wrong. There is, in a way, no such position as an alpha male or alpha female in a pack. It's more like I mean, you think about an extended family where you have 5 generations in one household. The oldest male, the father of the family, is the leader of the family. That's more like what a real wolf pack is like. You have the parents that sire the family, and then you have all the kids down from the generations staying within the family. So it's not so much a alpha, I'm the best, I'm the strongest, I'm the wisest. It's, hi dad, hi grandpa.
Yeah, I actually learned that fairly recently myself, and then I thought back to all of those role plays I did and was like, wow, we were really we were really off base. We put in all this work to make sure that our characters, our things felt like they were being done and said, communicated by wolves. And we had this completely wrong structure based on this super faulty study.
It's my understanding it's a fairly recent, maybe only the last 10 or 15 years understanding that this has come out. So hasn't gotten into the general public as much, even those who are in the know. So I can understand that. But it really made me rethink how to attack the pack mindset, and has even influenced the pack mindset of my next project, where I have alien foxes who are also live in a pack. But that's a whole nother rabbit hole.
So why did you end up still sticking with the alpha wolf theme for your story?
It got to the point where I couldn't effectively change how it what's the way to put it? I couldn't effectively change how it reached the reader without doing a complete gut job that I think might have damaged some of the things that happened. And true, lead, the main parent is the one who leads a pack, but it is my understanding that once that parent dies, someone within the pack might take over. So it's not outside the realm of possibility that someone within the pack will become the parent, and then they'll start siring their own kids within the pack. But the alpha concept is, I'm going to insult people here, aren't I? The alpha concept is easy to understand and process. So even though what an alpha is not what people think of, the term still fits. Even if it's not quite what it really is, the alpha male of a pack is the leader of the pack. We just don't really understand what that actually means in a real pack. So the term is right, just not the implication, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. The term alpha wolf has come to mean very specific things in our culture, and become associated with the term alpha male, which is a whole toxic mess.
Well, in this case, it's alpha male of the pack, or the leader of the pack.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately we're gonna have to really untangle the association of alpha male and alpha wolf in order for people to really understand how that works in wolf packs.
Yeah, that's going to take more than one novel.
Yup. Do you think you'll end up writing any more books about wolves, or have you just moved on to other canines?
Well, I do have a prequel that I'm working on for Luna. It details the adventures of Luna's parents and what they had to get through to wind up in the territory that Luna is born into, and also a danger that Luna faces basically the day he's born. And then I'm also working on a fantasy story with my own take on werewolves. No sparkling vampires, I promise. But so, I'm not done with wolves just yet. But
Awesome.
Foxes are next.
Awesome. So your disability, dysgraphia, specifically impacts your ability to write. Can you explain a bit more about what dysgraphia is and how it impacts your writing process?
Well, the main three things that dysgraphia does is, first is short-term memory problems. If you were to give me a phone number, odds are I would not be able to recite it back to you. That's not always the case, but things like that come up. So, in school, when I told my parents I forgot an assignment, I really did forget that I even had it. Another is I can get overwhelmed more easily. If too much is coming at me too often, I'll just shut down, and my version of a panic attack, which is I just stop thinking. And that actually comes up at work, because there's this one position where it overwhelms me and I can't think anymore, so I can't work that position because I just can't think. But the main thing that gets in the way with the writing is I have a hard time getting my thoughts from my head expressed, down on paper. Typing helps, but it's not excuse me, it's not easy for me to get my thoughts written down or typed down. And sometimes I'll just stare at a blinking cursor for hours and nothing will come. You know those essays you took about 3 hours to write in school? I was working on the first paragraph an hour later. So I have to dance around that block to get in the mindset where I can write.
So how do you work around that and have all of these amazing projects in the works? How do you make that work for you?
Well, first off, there's a reason it took me 18 years to finish Luna. It was a slow process. The other thing is it can take me an hour, 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours to do other things to just get my thoughts aligned, whether that's watching a TV or a movie or playing some games or watching esports. It's all about getting my mind settled and just aligned in a straight line, and then I'm able to more think about it. Sometimes also I just deny it battle. When I feel that block coming, I don't fight it. I just set it down like, you know what? And I start doing other things. I'll pace around a little bit while I think. And sometimes I just hit, Control S and call it a day. And sometimes I don't write for a couple of weeks. Heck, I took November and December off. I didn't write a single word because I needed that time to settle and ease my mind into it. I can't just write every day. When I try to force it, I do worse. So I'll try to nudge it, but sometimes I just leave it alone, don't do anything, and then eventually the story says, okay, we'll talk, come on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I also have a learning disability. Mine is more related to math and numbers. Oh God, don't talk
math
about
don't
numbers.
Get along
either. And I have found that was only really something that was discussed or thought about when I was still in school, like beyond the classroom. Most people don't seem to think of learning disabilities as disabilities. Is this something that you've encountered, and how have you worked around things to get people in your adult life to understand that this is actually a disability and that accommodations do need to be made?
Well, the funny thing is I had a harder time of that in school. I was writing in high school, and some of my teachers, they saw my writing, they heard me talk, and they didn't really believe that I had this learning disability get in the way. They thought I was just lazy, even though there was this learning disability that very clearly says, yeah, he really did forget that assignment, and he really is shutting down just looking at how many math problems he has to do for his homework. So, but thankfully I had a couple of special ed people who really went to war for me and said, okay, look, he does have this and you do have to accommodate him. And then I finally started getting teachers to realize, oh, wow, he does have something that gets in the way. And then they started working with me. In my adult life, it gets in the way less often. But like I said, at work, there was that one position where I can't do it. Thankfully, my managers have been very understanding. And, some of them have seen me where I've shut down, I can't think. It's like, okay, he can't do that. So we'll not put him in that position anymore. And then I do the other positions just fine.
That's really good. I guess just growing up in Toronto, I was very lucky on the educational front.
It helped that I had, my parents and some teachers who were, who went to war with the district and with the school itself to say, look, you got to make these accommodations.
Yeah. That is unfortunately a reality that far too many of us have to deal with, is fighting for those accommodations.
And, the problem I have, you listen to me talk. Would you think I have a learning disability just listening to me talk right now? So that's the problem I run into. I don't sound like I have a issue, but it's there.
Absolutely. Um, I'm assuming so. That's because dysgraphia is a nonverbal learning disability.
Right. It's more about mental. They call it a short in the brain. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but it's the best. It's the best explanation. There's kind of a short.
You are short of the answer of what a short in your brain is.
So it's basically a short circuit that makes it hard for me to process my thoughts so that I can write them down.
Yeah. But speaking is a whole different ballgame.
I did have I was a part of ASB, so that helped me get over that, but that's more of a self-confidence issue rather than dysgraphia.
Yeah. Do you feel like that was impacted by your dysgraphia, your self-confidence? Like, do you think that has been...
Not really. I've always been kind of a shy person. It's what makes self-publishing so hard for me is self-publishing is, oh, look at me, I'm a writer, and I'm like, hi, I'm a writer. Self-publishing world is all about screaming about yourself, and I've never been good at that. But I've gotten better at just conversational. Like I said, I was in ASB, so that helped. And then when I went to college for a little bit, I took a public speaking class and an acting class. And those two helped me to get over, just be me and just express myself. And then I started working over that. But dysgraphia, I don't think it really got, played into that self-confidence problem. It more like it compounded the problem. It was like, where's this problem? I don't see anything. You don't sound like you have an issue. If only you knew.
Yeah. So, I think that a lot of this comes out of a very specific perception that is associated with the concept of learning disabilities, and I think a lot of that comes out of how learning disabilities are portrayed in the media. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on portrayals of learning disabilities specifically, but also disability as a whole in the media, and how you would like to see that potentially change over the coming years.
I think we need more, at the risk of sounding too arrogant or conceited here, I think we need more people, like us, where you listen to us, you look at us, you don't think they have any kind of issue that gets in the way. But then, they're trying to work at Starbucks for the first time. Then there's too many things going on, and they have their version of a panic attack, which is not the screaming, yelling, throwing everything. It's complete mental shutdown. There is no thought going on there. The mind is just run away and hid. So I feel like a lot of disabilities and learning disabilities, it's always the extremes. The autistic person who can barely get a thought together or has a hard time speaking, or the person who's missing an entire leg. They like to go to the extremes. They don't show the minimal disability, the things that the people who have the little problems that are still very much a problem that they have to fight with, especially when it gets in the way of what they do. I'm a writer with dysgraphia. Those two things don't go together. So I'd like to see more of, for lack of a better way to put it, the highly functional. If you didn't know more about the disability or know them personally, you wouldn't think they had any kind of disability.
Yeah, and I do think there are quite a few characters that are coded that way in media, but it's never actually outright stated. And I think that is a really big problem, because when it is outright stated that a person has a learning disability, it's usually because, they can't speak or something really extreme like that. I definitely agree with that.
Or, it's not quite a disability, but you have a CSI tech who faints at the sight of blood even when it's on a petri dish. It's something like that. So he's only in ballistics, or he's only in trace. He doesn't work with blood.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, he could tell you what gun a bullet fired just looking at the bullet. He doesn't need a microscope. But show him a slight of blood and he's out cold.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff like that because it's very easily dramatic. Writers can just lean into that for the drama of the story rather than actually doing the hard work to build drama that makes sense.
And you could tone it down. They have a hard time processing the blood for some reason. Not so much that it makes them uncomfortable, but for whatever reason, they have a hard time working with blood. No one can quite understand it, but it gets in the way. It's not this debilitating thing where he sees the blood at a crime scene and he's just useless. But he can't process the blood sample because he just doesn't work for him. Just like I can't do this one position at my job. I can't do that job well, but I can do other jobs well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Are there any stories that you would say do have a really good disability rep of the kind that we're talking about?
Unfortunately, none that I can think of. I'm sure there's one out there that maybe I can't remember, but, yay Dysgraphia if that's the case. Not that I can think of, no. Not to say they aren't out there, I just don't know them.
All right, so then I will lead us into the final question, which is tell us more about these exciting projects you're working on and where readers can go to find out about them and keep up with what you're doing.
Well, the main way to keep up is my Twitter and Facebook. I'll post major updates on my Facebook. Twitter is a little more bit by bit because Facebook is not so kind to writers these days. So on Twitter, follow me on Twitter. That's the main place you'll get the small updates. I just figured out how the control systems on my Starfighter work. I finally figured out filled that plot hole, that kind of thing. The next projects, I mentioned the prequel novella. The working title is Blood of an Alpha, and it's also going to include two other stories that there were tales in Luna that were mentioned, but we never saw them in detail. Now we'll get to see them in detail. I don't want to mention that on the podcast because I don't want to give any spoilers for Luna. Those alien foxes I mentioned are the main alien race we see in my military sci-fi series. Book 1 is tentatively titled Flags of War, and this is nothing like Luna. Luna was a young adult coming-of-age story. This is a military sci-fi all about the horrors and burdens of war and the brave men and women who charge headlong into them. At least I'm intent. We'll see if I actually nail that. But that project centers around a 3-fighter crew.
You cut out for a moment there. I'm going to need you to repeat that last couple of sentences about the military sci-fi. Sorry.
So it's nothing like Luna. Luna was a young adult coming-of-age story. This is a military sci-fi. It's all about the horrors and burdens of war and the brave men and women who charge headlong into them. The main, like I say, it has those alien foxes, but the main story is centers around this 3-man fighter crew on the front lines of the next conflict. And then, of course, the werewolf fantasy, but that's very new. I only just figured out my magic system. There's a lot of more work to do with that one. The sci-fi might be out early 21, but I'm not sure yet.
Awesome. That all sounds very exciting. I definitely look forward to reading those stories. And I want to say thank you for joining us. It was a real pleasure to talk to you. I always appreciate people who come on and who are completely honest. And I have really been enjoying talking with all of the Spoonie authors. So thanks for being one of the people who made all of this possible.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Spoonie Authors Podcast. The Spoonie Authors Podcast is part of the Spoonie Authors Network, a community initiative devoted to sharing the stories of disabled authors and educating abled people about what life is like for disabled creatives. Transcripts of this podcast are also available on the Spoonie Authors Network. To learn more or become a contributor, visit spoonieauthorsnetwork.blog. And of course, if you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast streaming platform.